to the members of the House and Senate, thanks for making this happen. What you shepherded through the Congress not only meets the moment, it does even more. It's historical, and they call it transformational.
Joe Biden in the Rose Garden today with Democratic lawmakers talking about the historic nature of the huge COVID relief bill that is now law. People are starting to get pending payments in their bank accounts tonight for these relief funds that are already going out, $1,400 per person. 85% of households qualify. It really is historic and huge. 159 million households are about to receive a check for $1,400 at least. Everybody over the age of 17 in 159 million households qualifies. If you're a person who uses direct deposit when you file your taxes, that means your bank account information is already on file with the IRS. You could see that money in your bank account as soon as this weekend. Pending payments are already there now for some people. 9 in 10 families with children will start seeing more money in their bank accounts every month as soon as this summer. It is remarkable that Congress managed to pass this bill with this much transformative stuff in it, given the Democratic razor-thin majorities in the House and the Senate. When President Biden first announced this COVID relief plan, the AP described it as an ambitious opening bid. Axios predicted that the $1.9 trillion price tag would, quote, likely be winnowed down in the Congress. That was the way this bill was talked about at the start, as an opening bid, sure to be hacked away and winnowed down once it started into the lawmaking process in Congress. But aside from a few tweaks here and there, that really didn't happen. For the most part, the bill that landed on Biden's desk looked like the one he sent to Congress in the first place. He asked for this incredibly progressive, ambitious $1.9 trillion plan. And that's what he got. And now it's law. How did that happen? The best window that we have had on this show during the course of the 50 days where this thing was fought over in Congress, over the course of that fight, the best window that we've had on this show into who was fighting for what, into how different factions and different individuals inside the process were fighting to keep the bill intact, were fighting to keep it from getting watered down too much, was from a progressive organizer we've talked to a number of times over the years named Ezra Levin. Ezra Levin is a former congressional staffer. He's co-founder of the grassroots group Indivisible. And it was he early on who tipped us off about how, for example, the Progressive Caucus in the House was holding together and using their votes as a block in a way they'd never done before in order to make sure the bill stayed as progressive as possible, in order to make sure that it retained some of the stuff that progressive members of Congress most wanted, even as Republicans and some conservative Democrats pushed against it. Well, overall, the strategy really does appear to have worked, and Democrats appear to have passed something more progressive and less watered down than almost any observer thought was possible. What else do we need to understand about how that happened? And could that happen again, or was this the only time that could work? Joining us now is our tipster, Ezra Levin, the co-founder of Indivisible. Ezra, I'm sure it weirds you out a little bit for me to credit you that way, but it's true. You did help us see into this process in a way that nobody else really did. So thank you for that.
Rachel, I'm just happy to be celebrating you this Friday night. I wouldn't spend a Friday night any differently.
Well, Ezra, let me ask you about what you think people should understand about how the sausage is made. I feel like the Beltway press, much as I love them, really focused on what Republicans wanted and what conservative Democrats whinged about and all these things that didn't end up actually winning the day in terms of what was in the bill. If we put that stuff aside and look at what really did make a difference as to what was in the bill, what do we need to understand about how this process worked?
Look, top-level headline, you said in the opening, you got to give credit to President Biden, to Senate Democratic leadership, to House Democratic leadership. They put forward a really bold $1.9 trillion progressive proposal and ultimately signed a bold $1.9 trillion progressive proposal. But below the headline, there's this really exciting thing happening that we talked about before, which is Representative Pramila Jayapal, who is chair of the Progressive Caucus, started transforming that caucus, especially in the last several months. You'll remember that late last year, the caucus adopted a set of new rules that allowed it to start actually whipping votes and holding the line, saying, if you water this down too much, we will not accept it. So, yes, they pushed as hard as they could for a progressive bill going through the House of Representatives, and they got it passed, and that's great. But progressive bills pass the House of Representatives all the time just to either die or be watered down in the Senate. The key thing that happened behind the scenes, which is so exciting, is that as the more conservative Senate, including conservative Democrats, were considering this $1.9 trillion package, they were looking for ways that they could water it down. But there is good reporting out there now that says they wanted to take more chunks out of it. They wanted to water it down more, but they were afraid that the Progressive Caucus, led by Representative Pramila Jayapal, would refuse to accept those changes and would refuse to pass the bill. So as a result of that, you had a $1.9 trillion bill pass the House. It goes to the Senate. Yes, some changes around the edges are made, but ultimately they say, well, we've got to pass this $1.9 trillion version in order for it to become law. Darn those progressives in the House. I guess we'll do that. And ultimately, that's the bill that Joe Biden signs into law.
So is this one neat trick replicable? Obviously, this was the Progressive Caucus. It was an organizing feat among members who decided that they were going to use their power this way, that held the line, that created a credible threat that they couldn't be counted on for their votes unless this thing stayed as progressive and ambitious as they wanted to. Does that work a second time? And how does the fact that they may not be able to pass very much more legislation with 50 Democratic votes in the Senate, how does that factor in here, Ezra?
So I'm hopeful. I got to say I'm hopeful because what you would want to see happening in order for this to play out again is for a series of progressive pieces of legislation to start passing the House. And lo and behold, what do we see over these past few days and weeks? We see LGBT rights being protected in legislation. We see gun violence prevention legislation. We see union organizing protection in legislation. We see top of the list, we've heard from folks like Mark Elias and folks like Stacey Abrams and just now LaTosha Brown, the importance of democracy legislation like the For the People Act, that passing the House. All of these progressive priorities and now pro-democracy priorities are passing the House. Yes, ultimately, it is going to go to the Senate, every single one of those. And ultimately, they're going to come up against a Senate filibuster by Mitch McConnell. But I believe that based on what we're seeing now, the same kind of pressure that it was applied to the American Rescue Plan can be applied to Congress now in order to break through the filibuster and get this wildly popular legislation done. And the reason why I believe that is because all of the Democrats in the House and the Senate are experiencing this great legislative high. They've just passed this incredible piece of legislation, and the world is coming at them and saying, oh my gosh, this is incredible. I didn't know Congress could do work like this, but they did. So we need to fuel that. If you've got a member of Congress who voted for this piece of legislation, your job number one is calling them and letting them know, hey, you did a good thing. We appreciate you. I got to say, as a former congressional staffer, you don't get that many calls like that. So be unique as a constituent and call your representative, call your senator, let them know they did good. And the second thing is, for us at Indivisible and for folks all across the country who are worried about these attacks on democracy at the state level, we got to pass the For the People Act, and that means overcoming the filibuster to do it. So I advise people, if you're interested in that fight, go to savedemocracy.org, figure out a way to get involved locally. Time is limited, it is urgent, and we proved that success is possible if we all throw in for it.
Ezra Levin, co-founder of Indivisible. Ezra, thank you for joining us. I really appreciate having you here tonight, my friend. Thank you.
Anytime, Rachel.
We'll be right back.